So I want to welcome everybody here. This is really the second part of our series on looking at credit reports, specifically looking at the actual credit reports, and then to be more precise, looking really at charged off accounts. And what are the types of errors that we can find? And what we did last week, and you guys were great, those of you who were on here, we sort of all came together to look at this and say, okay, well, what's wrong? What's right? What is maybe wrong? And so I thought that that was very helpful. And there certainly were errors that you guys pointed out that I had not seen. And there may have been some things that other people pointed out that you had not seen. So hopefully it was a very good experience for everybody. This will be our second part. And then we'll just kind of see how this goes, whether we do a third part or if this is sufficient. So let me do a real quick poll here because I want to know. Let me share this now, just to kind of get a feel for who's on here. Are you a consumer looking to fix your own errors on credit reports? Are you a lawyer? Do you own a credit repair place? And I realize it could be, more than one answer, but just kind of the answer that best describes you. That'll just give me a good feel for who is on here. And then I will share the results in just a moment. We'll let a few more answers come in here. And so it looks like we've got about 10% are lawyers, about 40% credit repair business owners, and then about half are consumers who are looking to fix your own errors. And so all of that is very good. And then just one more poll. Let me stop this one. And this is more of just a simple poll to say, do you have any charged off accounts? Now, if you run a credit repair place, you can think about just your typical customer and just again, to get an idea of how many people are dealing with charged off accounts. And so just so you know, in my firm, typically, I would say about 90% of folks that come to us have at least one charged off account. A lot have 4 or 5 or 6. But there may be some bias there in terms of who comes to us. And so just curious here. All right. So it looks like pretty much everybody on here, either you have a charged off account, or if you're working with customers and clients, that they have it as well. Maybe a few people don't. Okay. So thank you for doing that. And here's what we'll do. We're not going to rehash everything we did last week. If you were on here last week, or even if you weren't, if you were registered before last week, you should have a replay link. If you just signed up for this webinar and you don't have last week, I put that on YouTube, or you could also just ask me and I'll send you the replay link, just whatever's easiest for you. So let me just real quick background here. This will be the only sort of repeat of what we did last week in terms of sharing screens and looking at stuff. So this is just the law, okay? And I want you to focus in on this as we look at a credit report account from Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. And if we have more time, I might throw another one up there, but at least those three we'll cover. So notice this is 15 USC section 1681I. There's a different numbering system that's section 611. So you may have seen on the internet, there's this sort of mythical section 609 letter, which is just garbage, the way people teach that. So this is one way to think about the code section, or the section. This is the actual code section, 15 USC section 1681I. Generally, courts use this sort of numbering convention. And so if the completeness or accuracy of any item of information is disputed, then the credit bureau will investigate. So that's our standard here. If there's something that's inaccurate or there's something that's incomplete, then we have the ability to challenge that. So I want to pull up an account, and I will look here at our chat before we jump into this. Let's see. Merle asked about some lawyers in Illinois maybe not doing this type of work. So, Merle, reach back out to me on that. I don't know that I know anybody specific, but I may know somebody who could give us a lawyer there in Illinois. And let's see. Archie says, I did a dispute letter identifying about 40 inaccuracies or incomplete information. Received a letter they will not investigate. Okay, so Archie, send me a copy of your dispute letter and then what you got back from, if it's just one credit bureau or multiple credit bureaus. Basically, and then we'll jump into what's on the screen, but basically, a credit bureau has to investigate unless they deem it to be frivolous. And they have to do that within 5 days of getting your dispute. They say, hey, this is frivolous. We're not going to investigate. Pretty high standard for them to meet. And they have to be very, very careful about doing that. They may say, well, we don't know that this is really you. Usually they do. It's just a stall tactic. And they may say, give us some more identifying information. That's why we always recommend your driver's license, a utility bill. If there's some discrepancy in the address, explain that. And the other option is they say, this is all the same stuff you disputed before. You gave us no new information. And so, again, I would just have to look at that and see, what they're saying and how that looks. So, okay, well, let's jump into what we've got on the screen. So this is a charged off account, and we've got the balance here, debt to credit ratio, available credit. And so we'll just start off and well, I'll tell you what, I'll sort of scroll through this account history, just let you take a look at this. And then we'll start to ask ourselves, okay, are there any errors that we see, anything that doesn't look right on here? And then after that, we will jump into this, the actual payment history grid. So what jumps out at you about this that you say, maybe that's not right, or that looks wrong, or that looks incomplete? So, all right. So John says everything is blank. Yeah, the balance, available credit, scheduled payment, the actual payment, the high credit limit, amount past due. Now activity designator might be that there is no activity, and that's fine, but it's just blank here. Okay. And so, yeah, Tanya says no payment history, it's incomplete. And so, it's just a lot of missing information. So we might start off and say, if sort of imagine you're creating a letter to the credit bureaus. And remember what I've told you, there's no magic letter. I mean, I did a webinar series, I don't know, 6 or 9 months ago, where we talk about, here's sort of a methodology to go through. And I gave you a dispute letter, but there's nothing magical about that letter. It's really, you say who you're writing it to, and you identify the account as best you can. So for this, you would say, this is XYZ Bank. You didn't provide an account number. The account status is charge off, available credits 2,100. You might put the open date. Just in other words, you're describing this for them. And then you just start pointing out the errors. So we might say, how come there's no account number? I thought you had to provide the account number. What John and Andre and Fleury and Brittany and others have said in here is that, look, there's just no data here. There's no balance. There's no available credit, no scheduled payment. Like what, where is it? What is that information here? Okay. Now, they may have a good explanation for it. It's unlikely, but they could. But certainly you can raise the issue with them and ask them to investigate it and see, why is this data missing? Is there some, valid reason for this? Or did the, XYZ creditor just not provide this information? Well, they're supposed to provide it. So it could be the creditor did not provide it. It could be they did provide it and the credit bureau is not displaying the information, or there could be some other reason, or it could be a combination of the two. So, those would be some things that we would ask about. And let's see. Tony says available credits inaccurate. Because we've got a charge-off account. Now we'd need to know when it was charged off, because it seems unlikely we could have available credit, okay, if it's a charged off. And really, we're also talking about the credit limit there, okay? But those sort of work hand in hand. And let's see. So let's look now at this payment history. This is the grid. And so hopefully you can see this. And I think if you look down here at the bottom, I redacted out the exact date, but I wanted you to see this was opened in 2002. So what jumps out at you about this payment history grid that either it's obviously wrong, or you would go, well, that's kind of strange. That's worth asking Equifax what's going on. So type in what you see there. Let's see. We've got, John asked a question. What's the likelihood they'll come up with the missing information? In my experience, it's pretty unlikely. And sometimes when they realize they can't get the information, they just delete the account, okay? Which is always a valid option for them. So let's see. John said 2017, October and November are 120 days. So that's a good point. If we did not make a payment, we would expect it to November to be 150. Now, maybe we made a payment, okay? Now, it doesn't say that up here, right, for a payment, because it has through 2019. It doesn't show any payment, but maybe that's possible. And I'm sorry, that's actually 2017, so we wouldn't see it there. But so it's possible that there was a payment here, okay? Let's see. Flurry says October, November, and the charge-offs. Yeah, Merle says no data available. So now just assume this report was, in December 2021. So we won't, fuss at them for that. But look at all this missing data. It's from June 2017 all the way back to January 2015. And remember, it was opened in 2002. So it's not like we opened it in July 2017. And it'd be kind of hard to be late the month we opened it, okay? Let's see, Tanya says, can it be reported as a charge-off for the next 4 years? Yeah, so really the standard is if you're a charge-off, it should be reported every month as a charge-off, okay? Now, there's only sort of one charged-off account, this XYZ creditor. But every month it can show a charge-off because they're supposed to report every month what the actual payment history is. Is it current? Is it 30 days late, 60, 90, 120, 150? What is it? Charge off? So here we're just missing all this data. And, if we have any question about it, we just go down here and we say, oh, see, those little lines mean no data available. Well, again, we'd have the question, did the creditor not provide that data? Or maybe the creditor did. And Equifax is just saying, we don't care about it. We're not reporting that. Well, then that wouldn't be the fault of the furnisher because, here's the credit bureau. The furnisher is sending that information every month. And if Equifax in this example is just saying, we don't care about that, that would be a problem. Now, sometimes what defendants will argue is they say, well, what difference does it make? What difference does it make that we're missing information? Well, the simple answer is if it wasn't important, you wouldn't have a space for it to be reported. But look at this. I mean, the very first reporting we get is negative. So did we never make a payment? Remember, it was open in 2002. That would be amazing that we went 15 years without making a payment, but yet we were only 30 days behind when they started reporting. So this shows a potential creditor looking at us. We never made a payment at all. Well, that seems pretty important that they would leave that out, pretty damaging that they would leave that out. And so let's see, Derek has a comment, isn't available credit a derivative credit limit less the balance? So that affects the debt to income ratio. Yeah, it's absolutely right. So you start off credit limit. And then if the balance is less than that, whatever that gap is our available credit. I have $1,000 credit limit. I have an $800 balance. I have $200 in available credit. And now if my balance is over my credit limit, then I would have no available credit. But if it's a charge off, and we can see this thing's been a charge off, they say since January 2000, well, actually December 2017, then it should be zero available credit, because they're not going to let me use my card if it's a charge off. So I wouldn't have a credit limit, and I certainly wouldn't have any available credit. Let's see here. Derek asked, if there's a charge off and then payment arrangements, does a new agreement supersede the old? How are the new payments, data last activity supposed to be reported? So sometimes you'll see in the comments, it'll say like a repayment plan, but normally they just will start reporting, here's payments coming in, and we'll see this in an example. Yeah, I think it's our next example. We'll see kind of how this is illustrated on an Experian report, and I think done the wrong way. Okay. Now, if it's a true new agreement where they say, here's your obligation, you pay us $100 a month for the next 12 months, well, then there's a question. If you make that $100 a month payment, are you now on time? Really, then we have to look at the contract or the written agreement between the creditor and the consumer to say, all right, what did the creditor say about that? So this comes up a good bit in loan modifications for mortgages. Let's see. Archie says, if the last activity date is 2020, why would there be activity after that date? So let's look down here. So we're not really given a data last activity. And let me just mention something about that, because sometimes there's confusion and people use this terminology different ways. Data last activity, there's nothing magical about it. Okay. It literally means the date that the last activity occurred. That would normally be like a payment or, something that's happened with the account. Maybe it's been sold or whatever it may be. Now, it's odd that they have nothing here. We certainly would say, well, hey, what's the date of last activity? But as long as they have this account, and you can see they reported it Christmas Eve just a couple months ago. And so, that's why it's continuing to show these charge-offs, because this company says, hey, we still own this and we're still reporting on it. All right, so let's look at this, the account details. And so what jumps out at you that you say, that just doesn't quite look right, or maybe that contradicts something that was up above? I know it's hard to remember everything that we looked at above, but we can always scroll back up there. But just what jumps out at you that you say, this does not quite look right? And I'll say this, not every account has errors in it, but almost every account has some type of error in it. Now, is it enough to sue on? Maybe it's, there's one piece of data that's wrong and everything else is totally accurate and complete. Well, maybe we sue, maybe we don't sue. That's sort of outside the scope of this webinar or masterclass, which is, when do we decide this is enough, knowing our judges, knowing the state of the law, that this makes sense to sue? Well, that's not our consideration right now. What we're just trying to do right now is identify all the errors. And remember, any account you dispute, they could just say, boom, we're deleting it. So you have to be comfortable with an account being deleted. But if you're comfortable with it being deleted, then my view is identify all the errors and put that in a letter and see what the credit bureaus do. So let's see what we've got here. Okay, John asked, could the loan type down here, it's misspelled. That may be a function of sort of Adobe. I'm not sure. But even if it's sort of how they report it, to me, I would not dispute that, because we know what that's saying. It's just somehow the I got missing there. Let's see. Tanya says reporting a past due. So yeah, we got $2,534. But if we go back up here, amount past due, there's nothing there. Now, is this correct that there is nothing past due, or is this number correct, past due? I don't know. So let's ask them, why do you have nothing up here, but you have a number down here? Let's see here. Term duration is 0. So now that is typically a reflection of, because this is charged off. So we don't have a set term. And with a credit card, we wouldn't really have a set term anyway. With a car loan, it might be 5 years or 60 months, or a mortgage, it might say 360 months. And with a charged off account, it's all due now. And so now that sort of loops back around into, well, then how do we have a credit limit? And so some of these things, they might say, well, we have an explanation for this, but then that sort of condemns them over here with other things that they report. All right, so let's see. Joan says no data for 99 months. So you see this months reviewed 99. So let's take them at their word. They really have 99 months worth of data. So what would that be? 8 years is 96 months. So 8 years and 3 months. Well, I'm sorry. This was where I was looking at. This month's 99. Well, then where is it over here? And certainly this is only going back like 36 months. So that's a problem for them. And so again, we're looking at things, and there might be some piece of data that helps them, but then it hurts them over here. And so Joan has pointed that out. Joan says a date opened is blank before 2002. And actually, I redacted that just for privacy. It did have a date on that. So that was sort of my doing. A delinquency first reported is blank. Yeah, so let's actually take a step back. So we've got the date of first delinquency. That's when we first went delinquent, okay, and we never recovered from that. And so we'll look at that in a moment. But the delinquency first reported is similar. It's not quite the same. It's just saying, okay, we know when supposedly we first went delinquent. Now, when was that reported? Now, you would expect it's typically reported that month or the next month, okay? Sometimes there's a gap, okay? But here, as Jones pointed out, just nothing, just blank. So when was the delinquency first reported? See, and we don't know, because all we can see is that this is the first time we see anything. July 2017 says 30 days late. Is that when it was first reported? We don't know. Okay, let's see what else we've got. Data last activity. That's from Flore. Yeah, like when was the last activity? I don't know. Okay. Now, notice this. They say data last payment, May 2017. Okay, was that the data last activity, or was it something after that? Couldn't be before, right? If the last payment was May 2017, well, then that would be at least when the last activity was, if not more recent. But the problem is we come here, May, we don't have any data for that. So how do they know if we made a payment? And of course, the payment wouldn't be up here because it's too old. But again, they have no data for here. So is that right? We don't know. How much was the amount of that last payment, May 1st, 2007? It's just blank. Did we send a blank check? Was it $1? Was it $1 million? I don't know. What was it? All right, let's see here. Yeah, actual payment amount, that's from Darlene. And let's see. Got a message here from Johnny. Lost the thing for about 15 minutes. So sorry about that, Johnny. Hopefully, I've just still been rolling along, and you could catch that gap in the replay. Murley says 99 months of data, then no data available for almost 2.5 years. Yeah, absolutely. Tanya says credit limit's 2,100, but the balance shows 2,534. So there's a discrepancy. So let's talk about that. It's a very good question to raise here. So the credit limit is this much, 2,100. The balance and the past due is 2,534. So is it possible to have a credit limit here and to have a balance higher? Well, it actually is. We could charge up to 2,100, but then let's say we stop making payments. Well, interest will start increasing the actual balance. The credit limit stays the same, but our balance has increased. Maybe there are late fees over the limit fee. It kind of becomes this self-perpetuating thing. It could also be that we had a $5,000 credit limit and we had a, $2,500 balance, and then they cut the credit limit to below the balance. Well, that would be unfortunate. And that's why we want that. And I mentioned this last week, this thing called trended data, where we're looking at each month and saying, well, what was the credit limit that month? What was the balance that month? What was the scheduled payment? What was the amount paid? Because we want to see not just big picture, but like for each individual month, it gives you the trend. Are we doing this? Are we doing that? Which way are we going here? And so, take my example where you had, let's make it more extreme. You had a $20,000 credit limit and a $2,000 balance. Well, you're at 10% utilization. That's great for your score. And then they cut you all the way down to like $1,000 credit limit. Well, now you're like 200% over your credit limit, right? Or 200% of your credit limit, I should say. So if you just look at that, you don't know, like, oh, this person's like really out of whack. Like, no, they were at 10% and suddenly the credit limit got dropped. So that's why it's nice to see it on a month-to-month basis. All right, so John says, when you send a dispute letter, is it okay to print out this page and mark arrows from account details to the above area just to illustrate the inaccuracy? Yes, I think it's a great idea. I would say this. I would recommend still describe it in words. Hey, you're missing the data for these months, or this conflicts with this. But you could say also, to help you, I've circled or made notes on some of these errors in the attached page. And then, just like I've done with this, for you guys to see, if we were sending this to the credit bureau, I would just print out this page, and then this page, and then, so it's 3 pages. Okay. And yeah, draw arrows, or make notes on it. Just make sure you keep a full copy of everything you send the credit bureaus. I should always say that. Full, complete copy. I can't tell you the number of people that say, oh, I did this beautiful letter. And I say, well, where is it? And they go, well, let me go find the Word document. I'm like, well, is that the actual version you sent? And they're like, well, it probably is. I mean, I did take some stuff and I moved it around, and because I was going to send another letter, but I don't think it's important. It's like, well, it actually is important. What were your enclosures? Oh, I don't know. I don't want to make extra copies of that. So, make a physical copy, scan it. If you're taking the time to do this, it's worth the couple bucks in copying cost, or, use a scanner, whatever you need to do to have a complete copy of what you actually sent. So let's go back here and we'll move on in just a moment. Let's see. Merle says first delinquency wrong. They violated section 623A5. So this has date of first delinquency is June 1st, 2017. And up here in the chart, they're saying that we were 30 days late in July. Now, it may be wrong, but we'd have to have some more information to know that this is actually incorrect. Now, and you may remember this from last week, we had an example where the date of first delinquency actually had a green check mark. Well, clearly that's wrong, okay? Either we were not on time and we were delinquent, and so the check mark is wrong, or the check mark is right and the date of first delinquency down here is wrong. So we always check that when we're looking at Equifax. Let's see. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, I looked at that wrong. July is the one with the 30 days. So yeah, we just don't know here about June. Now, It's possible we could have been 30 days late in June, and then we made one payment, which would continue us to be 30 days late in July. But yes, both of you are right. I looked at that wrong. This is certainly suspicious that they say that's when we went delinquent, when it doesn't show that in the payment history. And here's where I talk about sort of using all this information together. Again, like how could you have a 30-day and then a 30-day and a 30-day? Well, if you made one payment and you stay a month behind, but they've told us here that May 2017 is our last payment. Okay, so we could not have made a payment in June if May is truly our last payment. So we kind of bring all this together and say, okay, how do we show that this information is contradictory or it's just flat out wrong? So very good. You guys caught that. Let's see. John says, should we also print out the other two credit bureau reports, show them the differences? Yes, if you can. Now, I'll say this. Sometimes it becomes challenging just sort of logistically keeping all this straight, okay, and kind of going back and forth between the credit bureaus. That's the best case scenario. If you do it that way, so you're sending one letter to all three bureaus and you're enclosing the credit reports, it might end up being better just from kind of how can I say it? Maybe logistical is the right word, just to sort of keep it organized. Maybe to still send one big package, but maybe you have sort of different sets of letters. Like, here's my letter discussing Capital One, Citibank, and Chase. And that's all sort of, clipped together. And then here's another letter that's discussing this car loan and this mortgage loan and something else. So you always want to provide whatever data you can, either in words or you enclose actual reports. So it certainly is great to put all of it together. Just sort of be careful it doesn't become confusing. You want to make sure like you group all the reports on Capital One together, because you don't want them to have an excuse to say, well, we couldn't figure out what you were talking about. So let's see. Eric says, always print a second copy, have the post office use the same stamp they use for return receipt, shows date. So yeah, that's great. Back when we would physically file things in court, which where I practiced was many, many years ago, but still we would, if somebody took a bunch of stuff from the office down to the court to file it, or even somebody doing it on their own, we would tell them this. There's a little machine in there, and the clerk sticks your paper in, and it puts a date and time stamp. And you would take an extra copy and say, I want a stamp filed copy, because it has the word filed on it, then the date and time. And they'd stick it in there and give it back to you. So same principle of what Eric's talking about here. So that's a brilliant idea. Let's see, Eric sending certified mail. Yeah, I always recommend certified mail, return receipt. And let's see, Darlene says activity designators close. What does it mean if it would have stated as paid and closed? If it said paid and closed, it would just mean, all right, you had closed it, but the current status is this thing was actually paid. So we'll see that particularly on TransUnion reports. Maybe it's been charged off, but then paid, and it will say something like paid was a charge off or was written off. Let's see, Murley says Bank of America bought FIA card services and card was open with FIA, continue with Bank of America. Who's responsible for fixing the errors that happened prior to Bank of America being FIA card services? FIA card services really doesn't exist anymore. It was merged in with Bank of America. That's my memory of it. And so if Bank of America is reporting stuff from back then they've got to fix it. They have to investigate it if there are errors. So like in a mortgage company might take over your mortgage, and typically they'll just do new reporting. But let's say they wanted the old reporting from NationStar or their goofy name of Mr. Cooper. Well, if they're going to report that old stuff, they better make sure it's right. Okay. And if it's wrong, you can challenge that. Now, we've been in lawsuits with these companies where they're like, well, I can't, speak to the old stuff. Well, then stop reporting it. Okay. If you're going to report it, then you're vouching for it. And, if we go back to our text here, any information. Well, if Bank of America is now reporting this information when we dispute through Equifax, and we're not going to turn to it, but it's section 1681 S2B. And that tells us when they're notified, the furnisher is notified by the credit bureau, now they have to investigate. Okay. So if they're reporting it, they have to investigate. Let's see. Go back to our example and then we'll move on here. This will be our last one. If the balance is zero, but charge off amount has a balance. So so what Darlene's talking about here is this charged off amount. So that's just saying, here's the amount that was charged off. So if you paid this, it would then show a zero balance up here, but it may still reflect this down here. And I think that would probably be okay. But you could ask them the question, say, well, why do you have the balance as zero, but you still say charge off amount? I think if they responded to you properly, which they don't really explain it, I think the explanation would be, well, this is just stating factually, it was $2,534 that was charged off. Okay. So, and she's saying the account was not paid off. Well, if it says paid and it really wasn't paid, then that would be inaccurate. Now you'd have to decide, do you want to challenge that, or is that better to have that as it is? So that's just kind of a strategy question. Okay, let's look at Experian here. And so we'll just, because I've sued them a lot over the years, we'll just call this Capital One. It's actually not a Capital One account, but we'll just say this is Capital One. So you can see here, the example is it says paid and closed, and there was an amount written off. So same thing as charge off here. Okay. So what strikes you about just looking at this? Actually, let me, we'll just get it there. So anything that jumps out at you on this that you go, that doesn't quite look right. And I don't worry about it not being real recent here. Okay. I think if I remember this report I pulled is maybe from 6 or 7 months ago. Okay. So don't worry about that. But just what do you see here that looks odd? So we got paid and closed and written off. Yeah, so John says the balance updated, recent payment is blank. And so, the balance, in my view, should say zero. Okay, now they would argue, well, if it says, blank, that just means there's nothing there. Well, then why do you have zero for monthly payment? Okay, so let's make it clear it's zero. Now, again, their argument would be, well, it says paid. Okay, does that mean paid in full? Does that mean you made a payment? What does that mean? But the recent payment is an issue because they're telling us it was paid. Well, how much was paid? We don't know because there's no information there. Archie says, was this a paid charge off? Yeah, so this is saying written off, charged off, really same thing, that this is paid. And so the status, there's been a lot of litigation over this. Okay, a lot of cases filed, for example, in Philadelphia on this, where the argument was made, and I understand the argument, and it has some validity, to say you shouldn't put on there like charged off, okay, if it's been paid. And if it just says charged off as the status, then even the judges that have been ruling in favor of the credit bureaus, I think, would rule in our favor. But if it says paid was a charge off, or this was the amount written off, then not all judges, but a lot of judges are accepting that, saying, well, this is just saying, here's the status. It was in the past a charge off, now it's been paid. All right. So, again, we've identified some errors here that we could certainly challenge. And, this credit limit, well, how do I have a credit limit if this was written off? So let's look now at this payment history. And so what jumps out at you about this payment history? And let's see, there's a comment from John, opinion about Experian Boost program. It may be helpful, and we may talk about some different types of credit reports. Actually, if that would be of interest, we could spend maybe next week on all the other credit bureaus that are out there, because a lot of them are focused on what are called thin files, where maybe we don't have a dozen credit cards and car loans and mortgages. We're just getting started. Maybe we've had to use payday type loans or online loans. And so there are these credit bureaus out there that are really designed for that. And the big guys, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion, they've started buying some of those. And then even in the sort of the normal credit report, you see Experian has this boost program where you can like link your Netflix to it. Are you paying that? How about your cell phone bill? And that can be helpful. I don't know exactly how helpful it is. I would just say if you are linking an account, just make sure it's paid on time so it doesn't actually hurt you. You want it to literally boost your score, not to hurt you. Let's see here. Okay, so Adrian says yes. So I will make a note of that. Sometimes these are called the specialty CRAs or credit bureaus. And so you can always request these. Now, almost none of them will come online to you. They'll mail you the results, but that's okay. And it's all free to get. So, if they don't have a file on you, they'll just say, we have no file on you. So I would actually enjoy if you guys would request these, and I want to know more about them. Some of these we've been involved in litigation with in the past. There are credit reports for insurance claims that you file. There are credit reports for truck drivers. I mean, just anything under the sun is out there. But there are credit reports for your medical stuff, insurance claims, payday loans, all sorts of stuff. And I'd just be interested, for how many of you actually have reports from these other places. And then everybody will have a Lexus Nexus report, which will be like 500 pages long, and will have like your neighbor's dog's name on it. That might be an exaggeration, or it might not be. Okay, so let's go back to here. Yeah, Derek says Matt just posted a new list. Yeah, he just, I'm sure, posted. It's from the CFPB. They put it out every year. And so, matter of fact, let me see here. I'll just show you real quick where this is. So I'll just say CFPB. And so let me drop a couple of links into the chat here. Hopefully you can click on that. And then PDF, so you can see this is 2022. Let me make it bigger here. And so this just gives you all sorts of information. So there's reporting companies, there's employment, tenant, check and bank screening, personal property insurance, medical, low income, subprime, supplementary, utilities, retail, gaming. So if you do a lot of like going to casinos and things, they have a credit report on you. It's pretty wild. And so this is a great little publication to have. So just take a look at this, and then we'll go over specifically some of these, maybe look at the websites, talk about what these are designed for. So, all right, so we can do that next week. So going back to this payment history, we can see it's missing some in 2018. Maybe the account wasn't open then. And then it's hard to read because this is normally in color, but it's saying we were current in July and August of 2018. Then we got late. So let's just assume that's correct. Now, if we had information from outside the credit report, we would use that to challenge it. And then we went into charge-off status February 2019. But look at this, the rest of 2019, all of 2020, it says ND, no data. Why would they have no data for that? That just seems odd. Okay. Now, we might figure out why that is a little bit later, but it should strike us that why is this incomplete? And so why are you missing data from March 2019 all the way to December 2020? That would be a great question to ask Experian here. And then we won't do it here because I think they actually have it right. But this payment history guide, you always want to compare this, and so, okay, did we reach charge off in March 2019? So let's see. March 2019. Well, it says no data. So I don't know. This says charge off there, but not here. So that's kind of odd. 150 days past due January 2019. Well, that matches up here. So you always just want to sort of map this back and forth and see what's going on. But here's the real reason I wanted you to see this, other than all that missing data, is let's look at this payment history. And so, well, let's back up here. So remember, they said the balance was 686. That was the amount written off. Well, when they start showing us the balance, it's 628. Well, if it was 686, something must have happened to get it down to 628. But even if we ignore that, what happened between April and May of 2019? Look at the balance. What does that indicate to you happened? And just think sort of creatively. What are all the possibilities for the balance to go from 628 down to 571? So just put those into the chat. Yeah, Tony takes the easy answer here, which, hey, I respect that. Always go for the softball. They made a payment. Jones said made a payment. That's the natural thing. Now, I suppose it's theoretically possible. Yeah, Archie said it could have been a refund. Maybe we're just calling them Capital One. Maybe they go, oh my goodness, we made a mistake and you really weren't at 628, you're at 571. Well, if that's true, then they'd have to go back down to April and fix it. Okay. So yeah, Darlene says mistake. Well, if it was a mistake, then I'm sorry, let me get where my cursor's on the screen where you can see it. Then fix that April 2019. So really, it's incredibly unlikely there's any explanation other than a payment. So we come over here, zero payment. We go, well, that's kind of weird. I mean, if we made a payment, it should be listed there. And if we made a payment, coming back up here, recent payment, we would expect to see something, particularly since it says it was paid. If it's paid, we must have made a payment, but it doesn't show, recent payment. So go back to this little balance chart here. And we say, okay, maybe that was a fluke, right? Well, wait a minute, 571 down to 514, but yet zero. And then down to 457 and down to 400, 342, 285, 228, all the way down to 56. Look at this, nothing. I mean, the dates change. Isn't that odd? They're saying, well, here's when you paid, and they give us a date, but they keep saying zero. It can't be zero if the balance keeps dropping down. So that would be something, and the way I would word it is not, hey, you have an error or an inaccuracy or an incomplete situation here because you're not showing the amount paid. I would break it down. Say, hey, and we're not even talking about stuff that is not on this report. We're just saying, look, in April, you say it was 628. May, you say it's 571, but yet you say zero was paid in March. And by the way, how did we get 628 if it was 686? It must have been paid somewhere. But then in May, you say it's 571, but zero payment. And in June, you say 514, but zero payment, and list specifically what they put here. So we're identifying not one error, but 12 errors or 15 errors. So hopefully that makes sense. And then the rest of this, they just say between April 2019 and February 2020, your credit limit or your high balance was 500. Say, okay, well, was my high balance 500? Sure looks like it was 628. Well, maybe they mean your credit limit was 500. Well, come back up here. We got credit limit 500. Okay. So they go, see, that's right. That was the credit limit. But then if we scroll back, we go, well, wait a minute. This thing is, there's no data, but it says charged off in February. So how do I have a credit limit if it was charged off by them? Maybe it wasn't charged off in here. They have no data. So again, we're trying to bring all this together and look at it. Okay, so we'll do one more and then we will wrap this up. And let me see, here's a question from John. In single party state, which allows me to record someone via phone, one consent, which could be me. I was thinking of asking each credit bureau about when I first disputed each item. If it shows it was 2 years ago, I was able to prove this via this recording after showing them that it was supposed to be in dispute and removed. They never removed it. Can I sue them? Let me just say a couple things here about recording, first of all. So it gets a little complicated on recording. You may be in a one-party state. So Alabama is a one-party state. So anybody can record a conversation who's a part of that conversation with just one person consenting, okay? So the challenge comes in, even if it's an Alabama number you're calling, it might ring to a cell phone of somebody who's standing in Florida. Well, now are you in a one-party state or a two-party state? You say, well, I'm still in a one-party state. Yeah, but the person receiving the call is in a two-party state. And sometimes that two-party state takes a position, you have to comply with our law because this was somebody who's within our boundaries here. So the safest thing is assume you're always in a two-party call. And the thing is, this is my view, you have to decide yourself. If they say that, please be advised, all calls may be recorded. So what are they saying? First of all, they're saying all calls may be recorded. Okay, I choose to record it. They're also saying we give our consent to recording. And even if you don't say anything, your continued participation is consent. But think about it. This is, when I went to math class, it was very simple math. So if Equifax says all calls may be recorded and they're consenting, and in my mind, I'm consenting, it seems like 1 + 1 would be 2. Now, again, make your own decision about that. As far as the details of it, you want to know, did they get your dispute? What did they do with it? And then you really have to sit down with a lawyer about that. Let's see. Tanya says, can you ask a creditor to validate a debt over the phone? And if they tell you to send them this request in writing, is that a violation? No. Two things. One, if it's a debt collector, which is really where we use the expression validation, you're supposed to do that in writing. Now, they may allow you to do that by email. And we had a whole series of webinars on this new FTCPA law, Regulation F. If it's a creditor, you really don't have the right, unless you have a state law that allows it, to demand validation. Now, you can always request it, but again, even the most sort of liberal thing is the FTCPA, Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, and that has to be in writing. So if they say, hey, send me this request in writing, I'd say, okay, where do I send it to? And then just send it to them. All right, so let's look at this one here. So it's TransUnion, and this is a credit card. So just looking at this screen, we see it's a charged off account. What jumps out at you as incorrect? And there was a date open and I've redacted that. It's just sort of the spacing got a little bit off when I redacted that. So what jumps out at you as that does not look correct? There seems to be something wrong with the way this is reporting. So just take a moment and look at that. All right, so John says estimated month and year to be removed. Yeah, so it's not giving us the date of first delinquency, okay? And we didn't see that on the Experian one either, okay? There's no date of first delinquency there. And so this just gives us an estimated date. And my point to TransUnion is always, what do you mean estimated? I mean, you're supposed to know. So here's a credit bureau. The furnisher is required when they submit data. They have to provide the date of first delinquency if there is. What does the date of first delinquency mean? It literally means the date you first went delinquent and then never recovered from that. So we're not talking about I was 30 days late and then the next month I made a double payment and I was current ever since. I would have no date of first delinquency. But if I was 30 days late, then 60 and 90 and 120 and charge off, then it would be that 30-day mark. That would be the date I first went delinquent. So there's really no estimated to it. You're supposed to, TransUnion, have the actual date of first delinquency, and you're supposed to tell me that, and they don't do it. So that's something that I think should always be challenged. So Tanya points out we have a last payment made September 15, 2019. So that's great. All right, we got a payment made September 2019. Well, how much was it, Tanya? Well, as she points out, zero. What is that? How do we have a zero payment? Either there was no payment made in September, in which case this is inaccurate, or there was a payment made. Well, then, my simple way of thinking, now maybe, the Harvard educated lawyer that's defending, TransUnion in this case will go, well, John, let me explain to you why a $0 payment is really a payment. Maybe so, but in the real world, zero ain't a payment. Okay. So either this date is right and this amount is wrong, or zero was received on September 15th, in which case it was not a payment. So something is wrong. Maybe they're both wrong, but they both cannot be right. So, we've got to charge off. We'd want to look at this credit limit, and notice it's kind of worded oddly here. 750 from March 2020 to March 2020, zero from August of 21 to August of 21. It's kind of odd. You can notice here this high balance. It seems to be there's a big gap here. So let's look at the payment history. And what we can see is, sure enough, there's a big gap. So here's 2021. We have August, 866, zero paid. That's talking about a dispute. And then we have charge off. But where's all the rest of this information? It's just not there. Okay. Look at 2020. Well, we got March, but where's January, February? Where's the rest? 2019. Now notice on this one, there's no date where it ever shows us being current, which seems very unlikely. Okay. And remember that when Tanya pointed this out, the last payment made is September 2019. So let's go look. September, let's find our little marker here. So September 2019, amount paid, nothing. Well, that seems odd, right? If we did pay something, then it should be right here. Now, if this is true that there's no data because nothing was paid, well, then it should say zero, but that means this is untrue up here. Okay, there was no payment made then. So, again, we're just kind of cross-referencing all this stuff to find the errors. And what I hope you've seen through this is, while there are some overlaps, okay, and just the general principle is right, like find the inaccuracies, find the errors, find the inconsistencies, find the contradictions. But what we see with Equifax can be a little bit different than Experian, than TransUnion. And so you really want to approach each one individually. Now, then you can sort of pull back a little bit and cross-reference all three, okay, and say, if we had this account, for example, on Equifax, and what if it had all the data for 2020? Well, that's weird. Why does Equifax have that data, but not TransUnion? So we would point that out to TransUnion. What if Equifax has a, November 15, 2019 is the date of last payment? Well, there's only one last payment. If after the Super Bowl we say, who won the Super Bowl? Who's the reigning Super Bowl champion? Well, it's, either the guy from LSU or the other team, right? And so we can't say both of them are Super Bowl champions for this year. There's only one. Well, there's only one date of last payment. And so if there's a contradiction between the credit bureaus, then we certainly want to point that out. So tell you what, we'll do one last thing. This is, and normally I, block out the name, but this is, Verizon does this all the time. And so if you have a Verizon account reporting, this will probably look pretty familiar to you. If it's an Equifax, it'll say it'll have in this section right here, it'll have TN for too new to rate. But just look at Verizon here. So they're saying, payment received 0. Again, it's kind of odd. How is there 0? Okay. But then look at this. Like the entire payment history is just X's, which means there's no data. Why is there no data? That would be my question to ask. Verizon, are you saying that I was always late, never on time? Now, their response would be, oh, no, you were on time. We just don't report the on time stuff. We only report once you go delinquent. Well, not the smartest guy in the world, but that seems like it's sort of incomplete, doesn't it? I mean, what if my Discover card account, they said, hey, John, here's our new rule. If you are current, we won't report. But if you're late, we'll report those. So we'll report all lates, no currents. Well, that seems a little incomplete, doesn't it? So why are you only reporting negative stuff, or here only reporting X's? So how do we even know this is a negative account? They say, well, it's placed for collection. Well, when did it get placed for collection? They have date updated 12/31/21. Well, there's not even anything there. So I just want you to sort of have practice looking through your own stuff, or if you're doing this for clients and customers, just look through and find the errors. Now, again, that's totally separate matter on, would we sue on every error? Okay, would we sue if there's only one error? And here's where judgment and experience comes in. We might say, well, this one error, we would not sue on that. But if it's bundled together with 19 other errors, well, that may be enough. What's our expression we have? The straw that broke the camel's back. I mean, sometimes it's like, well, one little mistake may not be enough, but can you have 20 little mistakes or 10 little mistakes? They all sort of pile up here. And so, again, totally separate issue on, do we sue on this? Who do we sue? Do we sue the credit bureau? Do we sue the furnisher? Do we sue both? Do we take the furnisher to arbitration? All different strategies. That's way beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. I wanted this to be just all of us together looking at it and saying, let's find the errors. And then, there's no magic to it. You just type those errors into your letter. Maybe you include this and you circle it. Where's the data? Okay. And where's the positive history when I made payments? Maybe you include some bank statements that show, for example, in, March through June, you paid on time. You got some statements from Verizon or whatever it is. Put that in there. And so you can show that this is inaccurate. So hopefully this has been helpful to you. Let's see a couple things and then we will wrap this up. Tanya mentions this point about saying payment received 0, or maybe that was on the previous one. Yeah, I think that was actually the previous account. Okay, so John said, in regards to recordings, if I did request to record, it was accepted. Could I sue all those years if I end up correct since they didn't do anything? Well, what matters is, did you dispute and did you notify them of the errors, and did they do a negligent or reckless or willful investigation? So it's not just that there are errors, it's that they have to do a negligent or even worse type of investigation. So if they are saying to you, we never got your dispute, but they truly did, then, and they admit it, well, then that sort of closes the gap between you've got what you believe you sent them and now they admit that they got it. Okay, that can be helpful. Okay. But again, on that, if we're ever talking about suing, my view is you've got to get with a lawyer that does this type of work. Okay. There's no reason to do it on your own because attorney fees are provided by the statute. Okay. So it would be like saying, I'm going to a gunfight, but I'm going to leave my gun at home. I want to do it with a knife. It's like, why would you do that? Why would you do a boxing match with one arm tied behind your back? Like, get a lawyer that will do this, and always sit down and say, okay, here's everything I have. Is this enough to sue on? And it may be, or it may be the lawyer says, no, we need to dispute again. Or maybe you need to go apply for credit. Let's see if you can get approved. So there's all different strategies, but I would definitely meet with somebody there. All right, so let me go back to our comments here. So Derek has to go. Yeah, we're good to see you, Derek, and we will wrap this up very soon. So George says, I've challenged with credit bureaus and Verizon to no avail. So it really comes down to, again, did you dispute through the credit bureaus? Can you prove they received your dispute? Can you show that you identified the errors and you made it clear to them what was wrong, what was missing? And then if they did not fix that, then you need to sit down with the lawyer and go over that. Tanya, great stuff. Thanks so much. Thank you, Tanya. Appreciate your participation in it. See, Darlene asks, can a junk debt buyer, and I think we're done with that screen here. So Darlene says, can a junk debt buyer come after an account if it's listed as paid and closed, even if it has a charge-off amount listed? Accounts report is paid, charge-off, account closed. Bottom line is, does stating it is paid remove the risk of a junk debt buyer coming after it? So, Darlene, we'd have to look at that closely. Does it say transferred or sold to another lender? Occasionally I'll see that, and it will show that it's been paid. And what the creditor, it's not proper in my view to report it this way, but the creditor is saying, well, I did get paid. I got like 5 cents on the dollar. Okay. The question is, let's call it Midland Portfolio, LVMV, can they sue you? All that matters is, did they truly buy the debt and do you owe it? Now, what the creditor does after they sell the debt, creditor could say it was paid in full. That really doesn't bind the debt buyer. Okay. So what we do, we had a trial this morning. Debt buyer has to prove that they own the debt and that you owe the debt. Now, you might bring up the fact that, hey, Capital One, who these guys, they say they bought it from, they say my credit report is paid. And, that's something to argue, something to ask the person from LVNV about, something to point out to the judge. And, it just depends on your judge how that will be received. But it's certainly something to look at. But as far as, does this give you sort of immunity going forward, I would say no, it doesn't. But I would definitely look and see, is it saying that the account was sold or transferred? Because that might explain where that paid came from. All right. So Joan says, can a debt collector sue you before they ever contact you by mail or phone to advise you they're trying to collect a debt? It's a great question, and it depends. So I think in Florida, if somebody buys a debt, and I don't practice in Florida, this is just my memory. I think they have to send you some type of notice. Hey, we bought your debt, and it's been assigned to us. And if they don't do that, that may or may not prevent them from suing. I'm not sure. Under the new regulations, before they credit report, they're supposed to notify you. But in general, they don't have to. Okay. So, we have cases where the first time our client ever knows about, let's take Velocity Investments. That's a debt buyer. They do not credit report. At least in all my cases, they never credit reported. They may not write you. They may just, boom, you get sued. They're like, yeah, we're skipping the whole collection part, just jumping straight to the suing part. Okay. Now, that doesn't violate, in my opinion, the FTCPA, Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. Again, you may have a state law. Now, if you're in Alabama, there is no law about that. They don't have to notify you. But if you're in another state, it could be that you have a state law that regulates it. Adrian says, a lot of work. Is it better to file bankruptcy, one and done? Well, it's really a different question. So we wouldn't file bankruptcy for our credit report. At least I wouldn't recommend that. We file bankruptcy because we have too much debt and we just don't see a valid way to get out of that debt. In other words, to pay that debt, to settle it. We would say, well, here's what I owe and here's my income, and there's just no way I can accomplish this. Well, that's what bankruptcy is designed for. When you're just being crushed with debt that you cannot handle, it's to literally give you a fresh start. Okay. What we're talking about here is not making debt go away. We're talking about identifying errors and getting rid of those accounts off our credit report, or the credit bureau is making them accurate. Okay, so they can keep it on my credit report if it's complete and it's accurate. So bankruptcy is more of you get sued and you can't afford to hire an attorney, you can't settle it, and or even before being sued, you're like, I'm just like being crushed with this debt. So really, two different tools. It's sort of like, which is better, a motorcycle or an 18-wheeler truck? Well, they do different things, right? If you're hauling a bunch of stuff, I'm going to assume if you know how to drive it, an 18-wheeler. But if you want to, drive around Gatlinburg and enjoy the scenery and you love feeling the wind on your face, a motorcycle is going to be a whole lot better than trying to drive a tractor trailer around Gatlinburg. So just two different tools, and they have different purposes, different strengths, different weaknesses. All right, so Margaret says, if LVNV were attempting to sue or re-age a time-barred debt, is an email containing time-barred debt disclosure sufficient evidence, or do I need to request date of itemization or dispute request verification? Would like to refuse to pay via certified mail, but thinking I may need itemization date first. Hesitant to engage servicer via email due to risk with unsolicited emails. So let's kind of maybe start that last point. It's certainly everybody has to have their own comfort level. Do you engage in email with the debt collector? Some people are very comfortable with that. Some are not. The advantage of it is, it's quick. There's no certified mail costs. You just want to make sure that you do get a response back. Okay. But now let me go back to the beginning. If LVNV attempted to sue, is an email containing time-barred debt disclosure sufficient evidence to show that they should not be suing? I would say yes. If it's from LVNV, and down at the bottom it says, please be advised, the law limits how long you can be sued due to the age of this account. We cannot and will not sue you. And then they end up suing you. Yeah, I think they got a problem. Okay. Can they re-age a time-barred debt? So remember this. Re-aging has to do with that date of first delinquency. Okay, just to make it as simple as possible. That's all it has to do with. And it only has to do with the time it can stay on your credit report. So that's different than them suing you. So, for example, in Alabama, it might be that for a certain claim, statute of limitation is 3 years. So it might be time barred, but they can still report it for maybe another 4 years after that. So report it for a total of 7 years. So they might change the date of first delinquency, not necessarily to sue me, but just to report it on the credit report. Now, as your question suggests, it could be either one, or it could even be both, right? So we just keep these concepts separate. There's the time limit to sue, statute of limitation, time limit to credit report, which all goes back to that date of first delinquency. So you're saying you'd like to tell them you refuse to pay, which is the same thing as refuse to pay, or a cease and desist letter by certified mail, but you may need the itemization date first. You could ask for it. The date of itemization is really a concept with these new rules, Regulation F, and that could be the charge-off date. It could be the last statement date. There's like 4 options, and we covered that in a previous webinar. So in my view, there's nothing wrong with asking them for information. And then once you get that information, then you can send them a refuse to pay letter. And to me, that would be totally fine. And that addresses your comfort issue with email, which is totally legitimate. So hopefully that helps. Let's see. Arden says, great stuff. Well, thank you for being here and appreciate the kind words. John says, there are not great consumer attorneys here, especially your great amount of knowledge, could you co-counsel after reviewing case, see if it's worth pursuing? Yeah, and we do that some. So, if you want me to look at it, I'm happy to. Just sort of my approach is I want to see the before, the during, and the after. So the before is, what your credit reports look like before you disputed. Something came up in those reports that made you do the disputes. And then I want to see what those disputes look like. And then what are the results of investigation that you got back from the Bureau? And then the after is, okay, what do your credit reports show now? Because sometimes credit bureaus won't even give you the results of investigation, but they fix everything. It's not right for them to do it, but if they fixed everything or deleted everything, then typically I'm okay with that. So we want to know what prompted you to then dispute and what were the results, and now what do your credit reports show? So hopefully that makes sense. Tracy says, have an identity theft question. Let's see. John says, I did win against Citi twice and as a pro se. So I'm very curious about that. John, are you saying that Citibank sued you and you beat them, or you sued Citibank and you beat them? I'd be very curious to know about that. And if they sued you and you won, do they come off your credit report, or are they still on your credit report? Actually, I love those cases. We've been doing those cases for I guess 2006, 5, something like that, where we win, we're defending somebody, original creditor or debt buyer, we win, then we dispute it because it should come off our report, and they don't take it off. Those are great cases. We love those cases. All right, let's see. Daniel, happy being my first webinar. Well, hey, thanks for being here. And if you want any of the previous ones, just let me know. I'm sort of slowly going through and actually putting those on my YouTube channel so you can catch them there also. Let's see. John says, attorney isn't knowledgeable with FCRAs, great with TCPA and FTCPA. Yeah, these are all different laws. And, there's some people that just do TCPA. That's basically auto dial calls to your cell phone, text messages, things like that. Some people just focus on FTCPA, some just on FCRA. We try to really do all of that because there are overlaps with the law. And sometimes we say, well, maybe they complied with the FCRA, but this debt collector violated the FTCPA here, so we can still get them. And now the TCPA, we don't file as many of those as we used to. The law has kind of changed on those. All right, see, Murley says, general question, does Bank of America have to prove chain of ownership in their lawsuit if they bought FIA card services? So it's a great question. My position is yes. When you have these mergers, when you have these acquisitions, these buying of companies, they need to show that they are truly the ones that own the debt. I'll say this, most judges, in my experience, are less concerned about that than when they have a debt buyer. So if you have FIA card services and then you have Bank of America, and particularly if Bank of America sent you statements and you made payments to Bank of America, most judges would go, well, that looks like, I seem to remember they bought that company. But when you have Bank of America and then Midland Funding, well, Midland Funding definitely, in my view, and we've been arguing this, for 15 plus years, and even teaching judges about the Midland would have to prove they own that debt. I mean, right here, today is trial. Do you own the debt today? Okay. They want to say, well, 3 years ago we bought it. Well, prove it. And let's just imagine they could prove it. Okay. Well, do you still own it today? Okay. Because if you sold it yesterday, it doesn't matter that you used to own it. I mean, I had a house in a city called Chelsea, Alabama. I owned a house there. We could bring in the former owner, be the developer of the subdivision, and say, yes, I sold this house to John Watts in, I can't even remember, 2004 or 5 or something like that. So does that mean that I can go take possession of that house right now? Because, see, the problem is I sold that house in 2014. Okay. So I don't own it anymore. Well, what if I sold it 24 minutes ago? I don't own the house. So the fact that I used to own it doesn't matter. What matters is if I'm in court suing, do I own the debt right now? That would be my position on it. Let's see here. Sean, great info. Well, thank you for being here, Sean. Thank you for the kind words. Tracy says, what are the procedures in Alabama once you file a police theft report? So talking about identity theft. So here's the basic approach, and definitely reach out to me, Tracy, and I'll walk you through this. If we have identity theft, what I like to do is we fill out an FTC identity theft report or affidavit. Okay. And then you don't have to, but I'll just tell you, for anybody that I represent, they have to file a police report. And part of that is it just adds great credibility, because if you're lying in that police report, you can go to prison for that. So, we assume, and the court assumes, if you're doing a police report, you are being truthful with it. And then all that gets put together in the right type of letter, and we send that to the credit bureaus. And a lot of times we send it to the furnisher as well. Say it's Capital One or Citibank. And say, look, this is not my account. Here's my FTC report. Here's my police report. I'm telling you, this is not my account. I didn't authorize anybody to use it. I didn't ratify it. So ratification means if Tracy, you took out a credit card in my name without my permission, that would be identity theft. And then I find out about it and I go, great, let's go on a round the world trip. Use that credit card. Well, I've ratified it. I've now taken advantage of that. So in my view, I wouldn't have an identity theft case at that point. So you want to say, I didn't authorize it. I didn't use it. Usually you don't even know about it. And then you ask them to get rid of it. And I'll say this, at least when I've been involved, 99% of the time, boom, credit bureaus, they've got that off. The furnisher has that off. Everybody goes away. They don't want to mess with identity theft. Occasionally, they'll be stupid and not get it off. And that's a great case. Okay. So just get with me on that. But basically, FTC, Federal Trade Commission, police report, do a dispute letter to the credit bureaus, usually to the furnisher as well. And then everything should be resolved at that point. Let's see. Margaret says, my credit reports are clean now. Yeah, it's great. So just if everything's good, you don't have to pull them every week, but I'd still pull them at least once a year just to make sure. And through December of this year, we can go to annualcreditreport.com, get a free report from Equifax, Experian, TransUnion. Maybe do that once a year. Maybe do that every 3 months just to make sure. Because sometimes bad stuff comes off our report and then it gets reinserted, put back on. So you want to just keep an eye on that. Let's see. Darlene says, statute of limitations for a charge-off debt comes due. Let's see. Well, I lost my comment here. Oh, here it is. Statute of limitations for a charge-off debt comes due 6 years in Arizona. Is it proper and smart to get it removed from your credit report? Well, so basically it could stay on your report for 7 years, so a little bit longer. Just because, this is my view, and it could vary by state, but normally statute of limitation, just because it's too late to sue, doesn't mean they can't credit report. It just means you have a great defense if they sue you. So I sort of keep those separate and say, if I'm going to challenge it, I'm just going to use the errors on the credit reports to challenge it. And as far as whether you should, if you are beyond the 6 years, then there's no worry about them suing. If you're within that 6 years where they might sue, then you have to make a judgment call. Do I want to dispute this? Do I think they might turn around and sue me? It's sort of retaliation. I'll be honest, I've never seen that, but I suppose it's theoretically possible. So if there's something that you're like, I don't want to do anything because they've left me alone, and let sleeping bears, don't wake them up unless you can put them down, then you might not dispute a certain account. Okay. So again, right now with this webinar series, we've just been talking about finding the errors, not so much, well, what should we dispute? What should we not dispute? What should we sue on? So you do have to factor all that in. And that may be where it's helpful. Get a lawyer there in Arizona who does this type of work and say, hey, do you advise me to dispute this? And, if they're experienced, they ought to be able to tell you, I wouldn't do that. They might sue, or yeah, you're totally fine. All right. So let's see. John said, city used an attorney here. My case was dismissed due to something their attorneys did. Yes, came off from credit reports. That's great. Darlene, thank you for your help. You're very welcome. Thank you for being here, Darlene. Let's see. John asked, is this an ongoing thing? So we try to do these every week at the same time. Now, I had a stretch where either I was out of town or taking depositions or in court. And, so it doesn't always happen every week, but I'm trying to get some momentum going here. Although I think, now that I say that, I think I have depositions next Friday out of town. I may be traveling next Thursday. So if I have to cancel it, you'll get a notification and then it'll just be the next week. But yeah, we try and do these every week, have different topics. We've gone over defending debt collection lawsuits, we went through every rule of Regulation F. That was like 5 or 6, 7 episodes, I think. So we just try to have different stuff. And I try to eventually put those on YouTube. I think it's better to be live because, we try to make it as interactive as possible, but you can also catch them on my YouTube channel. Let's see, Merle, how do you find what banks do credit card securitization transactions? Synchrony does it. Lawsuits are easy to defeat. So I would just say this. It's an interesting argument. Okay, so securitization is where basically they take the receivables and they put them into this vehicle, this investment trust, and then they can sort of sell investments off of that. I'll just tell you, my experience has been at least the judges in Alabama don't care anything about that. Okay. But if the judges where you are care about it, then certainly use that if that's a valid defense. Let's see. So have a great weekend. You too. You have a great weekend. Joan says, thanks for the information. It's helping review my credit reports. Well, I'm very glad. Joan says, would be a great idea to do a pay for delete with Macy's in order to help raise my score. What's the percentage of debt that they might consider to settle? It's already past 6-year statute of limitation. They might settle for minimal amount, anything better than nothing. So a couple questions in there. One, if you're already past the 6 years, you're probably not going to be very much further before it will come off. So I would look and see. Let's just imagine this is coming off next month. Well, maybe I don't want to pay it this month if it's coming off next month anyway. Okay. Now, as far as the percentage, that varies wildly. If you're within the statute of limitation and they might still sue you on it, they, may say it's got to be 75% or 80%. During tax refund season, a lot of times you get better deals. If it's beyond the statute of limitation, yeah, they might take, 10% for it. If you're not worried about being sued, you could always just throw a number out there. Hey, I'll pay you $50 or $100 or whatever, see what they say. But again, check and see how much of a benefit is it to be deleted. In other words, is it coming off in 2 months anyway? Well, maybe you just wait and keep your cash for somebody else that you need to pay. All right. Florrie says, possibly speak on statute of limitations at some point. Yeah, we can do that. I'll make a note of that. It really typically comes up in these debt collection lawsuits, and it does vary by state, but we can talk about some general principles. And let's see, Macy's has a year left. Okay, a year left being on there. So yeah, you might want to approach them about a pay for delete, see what they would do. And Lily says, just piggyback off Darlene's last question. Instead of 6 years, it's over 10 years, the statute of limitation. What's the best or right way to get off my report? So no matter how long the period of time is to sue you, the period of time to credit report is still that 7 years, basically from the date of first delinquency. So even if statute of limitation is unlimited or it's 100 years, doesn't change the time period to report. You just have to make sure you're comfortable disputing it with the idea, hey, I'm still within that statute of limitations. They could sue me, So that's why I would get with a lawyer in your state, because they should be able to know, hey, Citibank files 1,000 lawsuits a month, or they file no lawsuits. So let me give you just a quick example here. Let me just show you something. So this is what's known as Alicourt. So this is our online court system that I guess has been around 15 years maybe. So let's say that we want to look up Citibank. Okay. Citibank as the plaintiff, we'll say statewide for 2021. So how many lawsuits did Citibank file? Well, it's 1,000. That 1,000 is the maximum number of records. So really, they filed more than that. Okay. So if I was within the statute of limitation for Citibank, and I'm asking myself, well, do they ever sue? The answer is yes, because over 1,000 times last year. And we can even, let's see, let's just make it, we'll say from January 21 to June 30th. So that'd be half the year. Let's just see. So 1,000. So again, you sort of get the idea. Okay, may not know everything, but I know Citibank sues a lot. Then we might dig in and say, do they ever sue more than 3 years? Okay, because sometimes they just have a policy not to sue after a certain period of time. If we say, for example, Citibank, and we just say all of 2022, how many have they filed? Well, they filed 101 lawsuits in January through this point in time, February the 10th. So that's something that if you're concerned about, I would get with the lawyer in your state to say, okay, well, does this company sue? Because there's a lot of companies that just don't sue. If we look at, for example, Chase, and so that's just somebody's name. So it's probably under JP Morgan Chase. So none. They typically don't file much. So they're starting to refile, but they got busted a decade ago for filing a bunch of false affidavits. They've been sort of scared to file since then. But my point is, you just look up and see, or get a lawyer to look up, how big of a threat is this? So hopefully that is helpful. And let's see, Johnny, you have a great day also. And John says maybe a statute of limitation in California is only 4 years. So you have to see what kind of debt it is. Credit card may be different than a promissory note, which may be different than a car loan. So all different types. But listen, guys, y'all have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. Thank you for being here, for participating. And, this is helpful to me. Hopefully it's helpful to you as we all try to just continually get better and better at looking at credit reports and finding those errors. So thanks, everybody. And I will hopefully see you next week. If I'm not traveling, I will see you. If I'm traveling, it'll probably be then the following week. So you guys have a wonderful rest of the week, and take care.